Welcome back. We've gone through all of the hard work of building out our launches model and figuring out the requirements of what data we need to collect. With all of that out of the way, here's my favorite part. We get to add a new router into our application. In our case, it looks like our front end will be accessing the launches in the upcoming and history pages. So the routes that we build for the launches correspond one-to-one with our launches model. We won't need to access, for example, the planets model in our launches router. This won't always be the case, which is why we still have our models and routes separated. But in this case, it really makes sense because we'll be accessing our launches model directly in our launches routes. So what we're going to want is to have a launches router just like our planets router. And we're going to create a new folder /launches for our launches routes. So let's create that folder. And this part is pretty much always the same. We build a corresponding launches.router.js and a launches.controller.js. In our app.js, we'll be app.using our launches router together with our planets router. They'll be matching against different routes under different paths, so it doesn't matter which order we put them in relative to each other. The important part is that in our launches router, we set up our endpoints very much like we did in the planets router. To recap, we need access to the Express framework because we'll be making use of its built-in Express router. So require Express. We define our launches router to be an express.router object, which we can then define routes on. For example, launches router dot get, and our first endpoint will get all of our launches. Calling some function we call getAllLaunches. Our friend module.exports can now take in our launches router directly so that we can use it in app.js. What about our controller? How do we bridge the model that we've built with the router that we've just written? We have this sandwich of a router that's ready to go and a model that's ready to go, but the inside, the controller, is blank. So let's make it something light but juicy. It's going to be a function that we've already decided is called getAllLaunches, and we take in that request and response. This function is going to make use of our launches model, which we can require by looking in the current folder. No, that's not right. We need to go up one level out of our launches folder, and then up one more level out of the routes folder into models/launches.model. And specifically, we're going to be making use of this launches map. So let's destructure that, launches, from our launches model. And when we return from our controller, we'll be setting the response to give us this 200 status code and to return JSON that corresponds to our launches map. Unfortunately for us, these map objects that we have in our model aren't JavaScript object notation. Luckily, we have a solution. What we really want to return from our getAllLaunches endpoint is the list of values in our launches map. All of these launch objects that we set using our set function. And we can get these values by calling the values function on the map object. So our launches map.values gives us this iterable iterator of values in the map, where we could, for example, use a for of statement and say for value of launches.values, and then do something with each of those values, where we can also set the value as a constant. And this would allow us to loop over all of the values in our launches map. But that's not quite what we want to do. We can't turn this iterator into something that the JSON function returns directly, but instead we need to first convert it into plain old JavaScript object or an array, which is also valid JSON. The good news is there's a function that helps us do this. In the built-in array object, we have the from method, which takes this iterable returned by launches.values and turns it into an array containing all of those values. Notice how our controller here is taking the data as it lives in the model, which allows us to index into our launches by flight number and store all of our data efficiently in a map. But then our controller manipulates that data into a format that works for our API, into JSON that we can return back to the front end. We're ready to export our function and see if everything works. Module.export equals getAllLaunches. Let's make sure our router is using the correct function. And wait a second, VS Code has automatically imported our launches model here, but instead we should be importing our controller. So let me do a destructuring of our getAllLaunches function from the exports in our current folder /launches.controller. That hooks up our controller and our router, exports the router, and then in our app.js, the launches router takes care of requests matching the /launches get endpoint. Looks good to me. Let's give this a go in Postman. In the terminal, let me do npm run server. And now in Postman, let's test our NASA project. So we can create a new collection for that project. I'll create it. And now inside of our NASA project, let's add a request called get/launches, save it to our NASA project, and this is going to match the route we just added at http://localhost at port 8000/launches. We'll save that, and let's see if our endpoint is working. Amazing! We're getting our JSON response with our array of launch data. let's make sure that Postman can request our planets collection as well. We'll add a request, calling it get/planets, and this time the URL will be localhost at port 8000/planets. And this is a GET request. Everything's looking good. But will our front end handle the data we're passing it correctly? Back in VS Code, let's terminate our server and this time run npm run deploy. Let's see if the production version of our NASA application is working as expected. It should, because if we go into our client-side code under source, pages, and launch, which is the component that we're showing when, let me close the terminal for now. We browse to the /launch page, the launch component is shown. And when we go to the /upcoming page, the upcoming component is shown. And these components take in the launches data that we've fetched from the API and display the different properties for our launch. For example, the flight number, the launch date, and so on and so on. The properties match up with what we saw returned from the API in Postman. And if we go to the history, we can see that the upcoming launches are filtered out using our filter function. We show this block character in greenish yellow if the launch was a success, and in red if the launch failed. And we also join the customers array and all of its customers with this comma if the customers array exists. What remains is for us to add a way of requesting the launch endpoint from our front end, which is going to be in our requests.js under hooks. This getLaunches function that's called in our useLaunches.js file over here is going to use the built-in browser fetch function and convert the response to JSON. So let's remove this to-do comment and move our description just out of the function. And here we'll do const response equals, just like with our getPlanets function, await fetch. We're talking to our API with the API URL, and we're making a GET request against the launches collection. Just like before, we'll get the response.json to parse our results, and we'll await for that promise to complete. Now, our front end is also asking that our flights, our launches, are sorted by the flight number. We can do operations like sorting both on the back end, but also on the front end. And sometimes for things like validation, we'll do it on both, just to be extra sure. So let's assign the JSON to this fetched launches constant, and then we'll return fetched launches, but sorted in ascending order by the flight number. So this will use the .sort function on our launches array, and we can sort by passing in this callback with a compare function that takes two values from our fetched launches and compares them, returning a negative value if the first argument is less than the second argument. What this will look like for us is we'll take in two launches, A and B, and in the callback, we'll return the first launch, A.flight number, minus the second launch, B.flight number. Now, if B has a flight number that's greater than A's flight number, well, a smaller number minus a larger number will give us a negative result, which means our sort function will give us our launches in ascending order by flight number. Our front end is making the correct request, and things are looking promising. Let's give our server at port 8000 a try. We've updated the front-end code, so we'll need to redeploy. Back in our browser, we're browsing our history page on port 8000, so let's refresh our server. And wait a second, it's telling us that we can't get the /history endpoint. What's going on here? And how do we make this work? The good news is we can fix this with just one additional character in our code. We've done such a good job in this video, so let's take a really quick pause and find out what that one character that solves all of our problems will be. I'll see you in the next video.